So, Max, thank you for joining. Welcome to Romania. Have you been here before?
Yeah, I've been to Romania multiple times. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My wife is actually of Romanian descent.
Oh, that's an awesome choice there. Have you invested in any startup here in Romania or Eastern Europe?
I haven't. So in Eastern Europe, well, I mean, it depends where you draw the line. So we've invested in Poland, I think kind of twice. I personally have a company there. I originally went to How to Web when Bogdan was running that in Bucharest. I went a few times, and you know the ecosystem's early, right? And like I think we still have this problem with, like, there's good technology, but frequently like the commercial talent lags kind of the promise of the engineering, right? Which is a little bit too bad. So no, we haven't invested. And then you know what? Like I mean, we only do consumer investments, so I think enterprise software has been easier here, right? You have the UiPaths and Bitdefenders and so on, and that's I think that's been true across kind of the board in Central Europe because, yeah, the consumer markets generally are early, right?
And what's your segment? Do you nurture ideas to become products, or you are addressing mature companies or already almost there?
So it's really kind of
like, are you
like
looking for traction already?
Yeah, so it's really a little bit kind of cross. It's cross stages, but the thesis is very narrow. So the smallest deal I've done in the last 12 months has been $250,000, and the largest one has been like $5 million as part of a $10 million round. So it's like seed and Series A. But the thesis is ultra narrow, and this is also like, yeah, essentially what it is we back companies that are and this is still quite new, so like the wording is still quite new, so I'm struggling a little bit. So the consumer economy is changing from a paradigm of automobiles and television to one of internet and smartphones. And you can see that kind of in every single sector of the consumer economy. So whether it is retail, where it's most obvious, to like mobility, right? It's kind of all changing. And the most important aspect in there is what we call the variabilization of the economy. So you used to, you know, only be able to launch a consumer brand, right, with $10 million, and you'd have to order a bunch of stuff, and you'd have to get a retailer to put it on the shelf somewhere. And now, essentially, you can, like, it's variabilized to the point of where you can do that with very small amounts, partially kind of single units, right, where you can just test things out. And so our capital is really, it's used on the one hand to kind of finance these first orders and then to initially scale.
Okay, I will take a few questions from the screen. What is your approach on cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology?
It's a multi-layered kind of question. So I own crypto. I think everyone should own crypto if you have a net worth above 1. I think it's an interesting thing to own. I'm not exposed to it, so I don't have to check the prices on a daily basis, so I'm not so scared. I actually recommended we do this on a fund level, and that was rejected by our LPs, right? Like what Founders Fund did, right? Like hold a bunch of Bitcoin.
What did you invest in?
Primarily Ethereum. So Ethereum is like been my best investment by far. That's been like, yeah. Well, not actually, like I have a company that's done better. Like we just sold a company a couple weeks ago for $3.5 billion, and we invested there at a 3 million pre, so like, phew. But Ethereum's been good for me. No, but I think the issue to some extent is like we're waiting for the consumer applications of blockchain, and that seems like, except for the collectible stuff right now, it seems a little bit far away.
Okay. So do you say that the key to gain more customers is to be associated with a good cause? Do people really prefer buying a product that has a good cause behind rather than a better product that costs the same?
Well, so I think that's kind of interpreting what I say in a slightly, it doesn't misunderstand it, but it interprets it in a certain way, right? Like, so I don't necessarily think you have to be associated with a good cause. I think it can help, right? I think, like, I mean, there are like businesses like Warby Parker and Tom's and so on that have been, like, from a consumer perspective, very successful with this approach of, like, you know, buy one, give one to a kid in Africa kind of thing. And I think that's awesome. But purpose can be more than that, right? Like, it can be, you know, essentially you're realizing that, you know, consumers are getting screwed in some way, and let's make a, you know, a product that's significantly better at a lower price, right? Democratize access to well-being for a certain segment of the population, right? Or even, I mean, we're in the process of backing a company that's essentially a dollar store online. Now, is that going to improve the world? Like, I'm not sure, but it's definitely granting access to the e-commerce experience to a wide variety of kind of poor people in rural locations. Is that going to, like, so, and the founders who are doing that, right, like, those are guys that have worked on that segment of the population for a very long time. They really know it, and they have high empathy with it, and they're, like, I mean, they're doing it for a, you know, it's not a good cause, but it's a good reason, right? So I think when you say purpose, you need to think it a little bit more expansively than just kind of like, you know, the charitable aspect of it, right?
Is that good for an answer?
Follow-up question?
Is that good for, I don't know who asked the question.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure, go on.
In real life?
Yeah.
So what are the other books that you... What other books would you suggest to read? Because I see that, you know, you suggested those 3, or you put them on your slides, and those are great books.
Yeah. See, I really need to refine the talk because I don't suggest you read those books.
No, I know. Okay, so you don't suggest then. Okay, whatever.
Those books are scary,
I read
man.
those books, so I'm just curious on
exactly.
other books of what you suggest to read. And
Right. There's a wonderful book that I don't recommend enough. It's by a guy called Parker Palmer, and it's very thin, a very small book, and it's called Let Your Life Speak. I think that's an amazing book. That, like, I think it's really, I don't think it gets read enough, but it's really about kind of vocation, right? Like, how do you find, like, what you're meant to do? That's one. I think the best leadership book I know is written by this Buddhist monk called The Art of Leadership, and I wish I could remember his name. But if you Google The Art of Leadership, you might not find it. I don't know what the best way around that is. But essentially, so it's this US military officer that, like, through the vagaries of life ended up kind of like converting to, you know, to becoming like a Buddhist, you know, quasi-bodhisattva. And yeah, and it's just a fascinating, and he kind of teaches you leadership from that perspective, which I think is fascinating. Let me recommend a third one. I'm going to recommend a book, and you're going to hate me for it. Right, and this is left to center. Yeah, I'm assuming you've heard of Jordan Peterson. Yeah, read the 12 Rules. Read the 12 Rules. Even though, like, he's like alt-right, antichrist, whatever, it's a good book.
Okay. Hi, Max. What would you say is the best way to think about investment for a company operating on a small, complicated market?
Oh, wow.
It's like a challenge, I believe.
Well, I mean, there's a problem there, right? Like, which is that, let's forget the complicated for a second, but even the small market is problematic. Because what that means is that, you know, you're assuming you have to get a very, very large piece of the market for it to ever be a significant business, right? And significant business in my world starts at like 100 million in revenue, right? So if assuming you can get 20, 30% of that market, right? Like, that's still a couple hundred million. So is that a small market? There might be just markets that are too small to go out and raise institutional capital for, right? So then you're relegated, like, how do you think about investment for a small market that doesn't support venture capital? Okay, well then you have to get other sources of financing, right? Which might mean, okay, friends, family, right? Like might mean grants, right? Might mean bank financing if you can get that business to profitable very quickly. Yeah, complicated is like, I don't know, I think most markets are somewhat complicated because, yeah, to really understand it, you have to work on it for like a couple of years. And yeah.
What kind of market? Is the person here who asked this? Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Did you have anything in specific in mind?
Yeah, of course. Hi. Thanks for your answer. So the market is educational. We are talking about professors buying software. And I don't know, do you know the biggest educational company? Maybe you can tell me what is the maximum I can go up to.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, depending on what exactly you're selling, right? Like, I mean, the learning management system companies like the Blackbaud's and so on, those are pretty big businesses, right? I mean, they sell to universities, they don't sell to the professor directly. A partner of mine has backed a company that's trying to replace that, essentially building like a Slack for education. I was not a fan. So I mean, one of the reasons we don't like these types of investments, because it's hard, man. Like, selling to professors is hard. Before those guys get out a credit card, they are, You know, and then like you're like, okay, well, I don't have to sell to the professor, I'll sell to the department. That's even worse, right? And then if it's not the department, it's like the board, and it takes 9 months to make a decision, and you have to hit them like in September because otherwise all the budget's gone. Like, it's very complicated. So if you're going to do that, you should think of it like a real self-serve kind of business, right? Like, and the guy who I don't know, that bingo card creator, have you ever seen that? Like, if you hung out on Hacker News? So there's this guy who did a teaching tool called bingo cards, and like all the US teachers love making bingo cards for their kids. So he wrote something called Bingo Card Creator. It was very cheap. It was like a one-off purchase. You know, that's a good business for him, personally. Like, it's not a business to build a real company with, but it's a good person. No, well, but it's going to buy you freedom, right? And if you love making this kind of stuff, that's a good business to be in, right? So, yeah, I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but if it requires significant amounts of investment, I would revisit your premise somewhat.
No, we are already operating, you know, we have customers. How can I take it to the next, you know? How can I gain 1,000 new customers without, you know, investing too much money or asking for too much money in investment?
So you're asking me how to get customers for free? Like, no, it's a good question.
With the least amount of investment, you know, with the least amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot written about like the guerrilla forms of marketing, right? Like, I don't know, like, where do those professors hang out? Like, what do their wives do? How do their purchase decisions actually get made, right? Like, I mean, go and dig into stuff. The best thing to probably do is kind of like, I'm not a huge fan of what Eric Ries did with the lean startup stuff. Like, I think what came before the Stephen Blank kind of approach is a little bit more sophisticated, but like, go and do that, right? Like, go and talk to these people, follow them around, bug them, kind of find the extreme use cases, like, and I'm sure there's a way in there somewhere. And then there's a lot of these growth hackers, like I think Sean Ellis was the one who kind of started that whole movement, and like, I mean, maybe it's handwritten letters, right? Like, and who knows, right? I mean, there's a reason that AOL started sending around those CDs to everyone, right? And it might be something like that. But it's very hard to tell without knowing exactly what you do.
Thanks.
Hey, I'm Anna.
Hi.
So in a world where people draw their identity from the work and from their purposes, how do we embrace failure so that we can still hang on into the identity?
Right. I think this is a great question. Thank you. I think the one way to think about, so I think you have to shift your perception to where there is no way you can fail, because it is all an opportunity for growth, right? Because you are pursuing your purpose. Now, the mechanism by which you want to deliver that purpose into the world might not work out, but that doesn't mean your purpose is not useful, and it doesn't mean you don't have intrinsic value, right? And it doesn't mean that what you tried wasn't worth it, right? Which is like, I mean, this is the psychologically difficult thing about venture capital is, first of all, you don't really know whether you're any good at it because it takes like 10 years for you to find out. And the second thing is like, I mean, you're very hopeful for every single company, right? And you're there with the entrepreneur. I mean, if not physically in the trenches, right? You're like emotionally you're there with them, right? And then, you know, half of those companies kind of like are sideways to dead, right? And so, you know, you really have to kind of question it. And the way I rationalize that, right? And you have to start kind of rationalizing, and you have to give yourself reasons for it, is like our purpose in the economy is to find these new offshoots that might get to something great, and we give them sunlight and water and resources and capital, right, so that they grow. And some of them turn into significant new things, and other ones, they don't really work out. But I'm not the person who makes that selection, right? Like, I'm just the person who kind of causes that to happen, that they have a chance, right? And so, and then once you've gotten to that point of where you've rationalized it, right, you've given yourself the rational reasons, you have to then start believing it. And that, right, that is an act of, like, faith. Right. So that's the tough part. But I think you can. And I think that's the right way to kind of think about, like, how you want to live your life in general. as an entrepreneur, I was not persistent enough. So, and the reason I wasn't persistent enough because I didn't do what you're describing, right? I didn't go out with a purpose. I went out with a, let's go make some money, right? And it's just not enough. Like the team falls apart, right? The customers are tactical. Like I really don't believe that. Not if you want to build a big company.
So from the purposeful missions and companies, should we give, I want your answer as a VC, should we give users what they want or what they need? I'm in a healthy fast food business.
Yes. Are you in a healthy fast food business?
Yeah.
NutriFit box?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. What they need, for sure. Like, for sure. And you have to teach them. Like, I think you have to educate them, right? So that one of the saddest things I saw, I don't know if you know Graze, which is a subscription box in the UK, right? Started out like, we're going to deliver healthy snacks to your office, right? And if you can look at those boxes over the years, there's more and more chocolate in there, right? Like, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. They just kind of gave up, right? Which is a bit sad. So we're about to back like a vegan meal kit subscription company, and like it's very much driven by this is not sustainable, right? And it's cruel to animals and so on. So I think you should teach consumers. Like, I mean, this is a wonderful way to like make content about it and talk about your company, get the right people to join. Like, yeah. So for me, it's almost there's that Henry Ford quote, right? If you give people what they want, like they'll ask for kind of mechanized horses or whatever it was, right? Yeah.
What do you recommend to do in order to go further beyond that fear of failure, especially when people have also the fear of losing money when it comes to invest in something?
Yes, 2 parts to that question. First part, meditate. I honestly think it's a good idea, right? And if that makes you uncomfortable because you think it's some Eastern like bullshit, then there's a Christian tradition called contemplative prayer, which is essentially the exact same thing, right? Sit with yourself, become comfortable with yourself, right? Listen to the silence, kind of thing, right? Let stuff go. I think that's very. The second one is what changed. Oh, sorry. Yeah. What was the second question? Part of the question?
No. Yeah.
Yes, don't take money from those people, because like they're gonna screw with you, like in unfortunate ways. So you have to really take money from people who are, like, of course no one likes losing money, but you should try and attempt, you should try to find people who have lost money before and who are comfortable with that, because the other kind I would say like you really find out who someone is when there's like money at stake in the end, and it can be like, wow. Like, and not just when they're losing money, also when they're making money, right? Like, so when we sell companies for like, I don't know, I sold a company last year for like 150 million bucks, right? And I thought they were all nice people around the table. Turns out not so much, right? Not when it can really. So do you live by the ideas you shared on the main stage? I attempt to. What changed in your life when and if you adopted that ideology? I don't like this ideology word because it's a more, yeah, but like, sure, mindset, attitude, what. So I don't do it consistently enough. When I do it, good things happen, right? Which is a little bit weird because it's like a magical view of the world, and like we live in a time where you don't want that, right? Like we want materialist, scientist kind of views. But and so whenever like I read a book that says, you have to look at your energy, right? Like I'm kind of like, I just switch out energy and I say attitude, because like everyone understands and this is the same thing, right? And if a founder comes to you and says, man, like things are going badly and I'm really like doubting stuff and so, if you bring like the attitude of not worrying about like I'm going to lose all my money, right? Oh my God, this company's in real trouble. Like I'm probably going to have to fire that guy. If you don't bring that attitude, but you bring the attitude of like, okay, well, what's it? Like, what can we learn here? Like, how can I change that guy's perception, right, of the situation, so that we actually become constructive, right? Like there's so much beauty in that process, and that's also a founder that's going to give me, like even if that company doesn't do well, he's going to give me an amazing reference for like the next 5 years, right? And then you realize that actually what venture capital is a meta game of like you just want to keep playing. You want entrepreneurs to keep calling you and saying like, I'm going to take your money because like I heard good things. So, and you just want to keep doing that as much as possible, right? Which is, and if you think about that metagame, like actually that's also true for entrepreneurship and everything you really do in life. What's missing in Google that you started building a new search engine? We wanted to rebuild friend feed because we thought the social web was going to be more fragmented than it turned out to be, right? And then in the end, what happened was that the API kind of like people use case was much stronger than the consumer people search use case. I mean, Obama for America used us to look up 150 million US email addresses as part of the 2012 campaign, right? And you know, MailChimp used us for every single email account, like email address that ever went through MailChimp. Like we looked that up. So there's a lot of demand for that. And then Cambridge Analytica came and kind of did the same thing, but with non-public data. Yeah, so it's, I don't know. It's a bit of a gray hat kind of field, and I wouldn't recommend you go into it. You do the will of God, man. I wouldn't be so presumptuous. What's my purpose? I don't know if you're familiar with the, and this is you know, it's another Christian thing, right? Like, but I don't know if you're familiar with the good death or the good life, right? But it's from like conceptually, like trying to be a good person is hard, right? Like, and not just like, I mean, you should be conscientious about things that it's hard to be conscientious about, right? You should revisit the resistance I hate bureaucracy. I hate authority, right? Those are real challenges in my life. Like, for me to properly file my taxes is like, it's a fight I have with myself. But I know if I don't do that, right, that's gonna come back to haunt me, right? And this is a story that we as humans have told ourselves for a really, really long time, right? Like that's the concept of sacrifice, right? You know, if I don't discipline my daughter now, that's gonna be really bad for her when she grows up. So I just want to give her more chocolate, but I'm not gonna, right? So like doing these things and trying to live your life properly, I think that is what I would describe my inner purpose to be, right? And then there's an outer purpose, right, which is kind of, you know, the role I find myself in and how I want to transport that role into the world. And that talk that you saw today is, you know, that's part of that. Did you invest in AGI tokens? What the frack is that? Like artificial general intelligence tokens? There is such a thing? That sounds like a massive scam. Really? No, I have not heard of this. I'm so sorry.
It's based on Ethereum.
It's based on Ethereum. Okay. This does not necessarily make it better. Is it, what does it do? Come on, like, no, but what does it do? How do you choose which habits will help the team grow and improve the workflow and which have the potential to become hurtful chores? Huh. So since I'm not familiar with the ideas in the book, The Power of Habit, I can't answer that part of the question, but it's a really interesting one because we have this period in the life of our company where in the beginning it's kind of like a self-managing team, right? Where like you're 5 to maybe 15, maybe 20 people, and it kind of just works, right? Because the founder has the vision, right? And like there's different competences and like like if you hire kind of like competent people, it just kind of hums along. And then there's a point in time where you're above 20 people, like you're growing maybe to 30, maybe to 40, where stuff gets complicated because people are complicated, right? And you need structure. And that's the point where one of the founders kind of sits back and says, we have to become a real company now, right? And that's when you get process and bureaucracy and like, and it's tough. Like this is, so for me, the hardest part is like this, like 25 to 100 people. That's like the hardest part in the company's life for me because there's no obvious solutions and you kind of revisit, you play around with different organizational forms. It's very hard. Once you hit about 100 people, maybe 75, maybe 100 people, you generally get to the point where you're like, there's way too much stuff going on for a single person to like have control, right? So this is the point where the founders really need to start kind of like really letting go. And the second is the stuff is too complicated, right? And too detailed for too many people to be involved. So you can't do like company-wide all meetings, right? So you have to have cross-functional teams in some sort of way. And that generally means you have to devolve power and responsibility to the edges of the organization. So you have to have that one person that's like responsible for the website, right? And anything to do with the website, go to that guy, talk to him. I'm not sure like where like whether like properly self-managing companies actually work. I think there's a reason we have hierarchy, but yeah. As to what habits are healthy, it's so difficult to tell. There's definitely stuff that's just always unhealthy, right? Like there are kind of political instances that are unhealthy, right? There are kind of like, you know, power centers that if you let them kind of create themselves that are unhealthy, right? You have to, like, one of the favorite things that we do internally at Sunstone is if we like, we have this mechanism where if we feel like one of our partners is arguing from like a place of ego where they're like primarily concerned about themselves or their investment or something, like we always call that out. And that's very, like, I think that's extremely healthy because it kind of keeps the company, like the company kind of has a seat at the table, right? I don't know if that answers that.
I have a question for you. You said that yourself, you're like a bad entrepreneur, right?
Yes.
What makes an entrepreneur to be good or bad?
I was a poor entrepreneur in the sense that I left my businesses too early. Both of them could have gone on to do interesting things, and I got scared.
Okay.
Well, we sold both of them. One of them we sold, which I think undervalue, right, because I left. And the second one, we didn't do the pivot that we were considering, but kind of, we merged it into a different company. It was acquired by LinkedIn. I think both of it is just a lack of persistence, right? Like where I got like, and my co-founders as well, we got caught up kind of in our head thinking like, oh, this is just not, like, it didn't work to plan. Right?
So when building the team, and you were saying that at the beginning is self-reliant and then it grows, I'm curious, in the beginning of the company, so between, I don't know, 10 and 40 people, let's say, when it actually becomes a little bit more complicated, would you recommend hiring the best people that you can afford or people that are very enthusiastic about the purpose of that company? And maybe it's a tricky question, but
no, I think it's a very valuable question. It usually gets posed in a slightly different way. Like when should you kind of look for senior people, like who have the experience? And the recommendation there is like, don't do that. Like hire the senior persons, like right-hand guy, girl that has done this for, like they've seen it, they haven't kind of operated at that level, and that's fine, right? But they're still hungry and because what we found is when we hire the senior people, first of all, they do cost a lot of money, and secondly, they're not used to working anymore. Like they don't roll up their sleeves. They come in, then they hire a team of like 5 to 10 people, and then they try and make that. And it's just generally, we have not seen it work. We've also kind of seen like that they then get rejected from a culture perspective. Like they've been too long at, I don't know, Booking.com, and they come into like a small travel business, and like then they want to do everything. Google is actually the better example in this. Google has a weird culture in that way, right? Like it's extremely difficult to hire senior people from Google and make them work in a company that is not founded by ex-Googlers. Like, and that's because like culturally, at some point they've adopted this, like the way Google does it is the only way that's valid, and so that's what they try to do. I think to your other question, this is a like enthusiasm versus best possible. I think it is much better to hire very competent people that you can convince of like that it's, because like one of the examples is I have as a friend of mine has a relatively large yoga business. It's an app on the phone called Asana Rebel, and they do a couple. I mean, I think at this point they're doing something like 2 or 3 million euros in revenue a month, and which is like for an app company that's pretty cool. But that one thing that company has found is that if you go and hire the real yoga enthusiasts, that's bad news, because like first of all they're very religious about like what is the right way of doing yoga, and then the second thing is like they're generally out doing yoga, right? Like they don't want to be kind of sitting in the office, and so that's been a real challenge. So I think, I mean, ideally you find someone who's great, like at both, right? But I think kind of bias is on competence, I think.
Okay, guys, anything? Okay, one more.
You talked about the fear of failure, but what about the fear of success? As you said earlier, you quit 2 of your startups or first companies and as an entrepreneur because you were afraid, I guess. And recently I've had quite the same problem with the startup I've been in. I wanted to quit because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to handle the users in helping them because it was a help-based startup.
Right. So for me, there are 2 questions in there. I think there's one is, how do you manage the complexity of the startup life? Because it is hard, right? In the sense that it's quite uncertain. Sorry, man. It's quite uncertain, right? Like, so, and it can be overwhelming. Listen, I'm overwhelmed by my job sometimes, right? Like, because, you know, I'm like a walking ATM. I give out money, so everyone wants to talk to you. Like, my email is, I can't control it, right? Like, I regularly have to declare kind of like email bankruptcy, and so, like, yes, it is overwhelming, but then you have to figure that out, right? Like, so you have to, like, your job is to bring order to that complexity, right? That's what doing the company is, right? And if you have a ton of demand, right? I mean, like, that's amazing. Most companies fail because they don't have a ton of demand, right? So the hard advice, and it's gonna sound awful, but I'm gonna just put it that because it's a little bit humorous, it's like, man, the fuck up, right? Like, and figure it out. Because that's, like, maybe half of those, you know, user support inquiries you can manage with intercom or some other thing, right? Like, and it's kind of, so I think that there's a line there between, like, what you cannot handle as a single person, which is fine and fair enough, and that you have to structure some way, or you have to simplify it, right? I mean, if you're building a fantastic product, but you're just like a couple of people, right, and you can't, I mean, like, just put it on the side of the label, like, no customer support. Like, if you don't like it, go away, because right now we can't handle it, right? And I think that's perfectly legitimate when you're building something that people want. I think the other, so there's one part that's like about, like, simplify, right? Reduce complexity for yourself. The other part is about reducing uncertainty overall in your life, and I think that's where you have to look at kind of poles of stability and build that into your life, right? There's family, right? There's your living situation. There is the balance between kind of like, you know, most of these companies that we do, you know, they're not physical labor, right? Like, so doing physical exercise is super important, right, to actually retain that balance. And then wherever those sources of stability come from you, like, you have to nurture that, and that's an aspect of self-care that I think, like, all entrepreneurs need to be aware of, that's, like, it's not gonna work. And if you look at the statistics, right, like, the people who work themselves into the ground, right, are actually less productive over time than the people who don't do that. You know, who take the weekend off, right? Because, I mean, there's a reason our week has that structure, right? More or less. So I don't know if that answers your question. And it's like, and listen, in my 20s, like, when I did the company, it's like I didn't know that's, you know, that was going to happen. Maybe one third and very, very quick answer is, like, if you look at kind of what's happening to Notch, right, like on Twitter, the Mojang/Minecraft founder, right, like, I mean, wow, right? So, like, we're right to be somewhat afraid of success as well, right? Like, and in my, like, at the end of my 20s, I sold my first angel investment, Last.fm, which was a, you know, a music kind of sharing, listening company, and that was like, I'd done a company, and the company was kind of moderately unsuccessful, and I'd done this one angel investment, and I had very little to do with it, and suddenly, like, that worked out. So, like, that made me feel, it was weird, right? Because, like, you're lucky because you were in the right place at the right time, but really you have nothing to do with that, right? And yet good things started to happen in my life because of it, and I kind of feel like, whoa, like, you know, like, so you really question your self-worth, and I think it's important to be conscious of that and manage that. Sorry. Do we need to finish? I have no idea. You said like 20 minutes ago we should be finishing.
Just one more and then we're done. So do you have a preference when it comes to technical entrepreneurs versus industry experts? You gave the example about the yoga, but maybe, I don't know, when it comes to the NutriFit box, if he's a technical entrepreneur that can create a nice website for that business, or an actual chef?
Yeah. No, good question. So because of what I invest in is primarily consumer brands, the competencies are slightly different relative to a software company. So I think in a software company you would generally prefer your founders to be engineers. I think that's just true, right? And that is actually something that, and if they're not engineers, you want to have managers who are capable of giving the engineers kind of the freedom to do a good job, right? Which that's the main insight of like Bill Campbell, who was probably one of the best executive coaches in the Valley. But from our perspective, like I need other competencies on the team, and one of them is domain expertise, certainly. The other one definitely is kind of branding. Maybe there's some performance marketing in there, right? There's product in there, right? Because you need to have some sort of core product innovation. I think to the earlier point is I think a high quality product is a little bit table stakes, right? After that, you know, that's why I keep going on about purpose, not because I think the product can be worse as long as you're doing good in the world. No, I think the product just needs to be at least on par with the other ones, right? And then there are also aspects of kind of logistics and so on. So you know, generally it's good to, if you do a retail, it's good to have someone who's done e-commerce before. But then a lot of this stuff can be hired as well, right? So if you have a phenomenal kind of idea, prototype, and so on, like you can attract good people around it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Max.
Thank you.
It's been awesome.